That's actually a great question. People say that in our space, overnight success takes like 20 years to build. So that's precisely how things started. I mean, we saw the pioneers on the space founding companies like 20, 25 years ago. I remember when I met Fabrizio in the launch space at our university. He was starting his company, and that was 24 years ago, Fabrizio. So that's how long it takes. But the interesting thing is, it's happening in terms of new layers on top of new layers. You started with a small amount of founders, then you created the first steps of the funding ecosystem, the infrastructure was built, and now what we're seeing is acceleration because everything is being piled up. So that's something that has been constructed for a long time.
Fibonacci. So we see 5 secular trends leading to where we are today. One, number of experienced founders, second timers, third timers, it's all-time high, which is fantastic. 2, our addressable market just expanded, right? So Resultados Digitais is global, Gympass is global, Hotmart is global. So we are beyond just Brazil now. 3, we are attracting talent from all over the economy. People want to work for startups all the time. 4, there's no shortage of money throughout the value chain, from angels to late stage. And 5th, most importantly, we are still at 20% capacity, right? I mean, there's so much space for money to be deployed in Brazil that the risk reward for investing in Brazil is, much better than US, Israel, or China. So, fantastic moment.
So, from my perspective, I think what is very exciting about Brazil is essentially that the consumers themselves are actually very, very open to innovation. And it is very important, and I've started saying that very early on when I was working with WhatsApp and we were doing research in the market. And if you compare it with the other markets in Latin America, you will see that the end users are very sophisticated and they're happy to adopt new services and new products and very excited about that. And I think that is a very important factor that drives the market forward. And again, I was really, really surprised when I actually started comparing what we've been seeing in Brazil to the other markets. And I think that's why I'm very optimistic about the market, because the kind of consumers and users that are on the receiving end of those products, they're actually happy to try them out. And that kind of moves the whole space forward, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think Brazil is very hot right now, but it took a long time to create the infrastructure and the platform, the ecosystem, for all the companies to be successful. And I think right now you're going to see the speed be a lot faster than before because the structure is already there, the attention is there, the money is there. So I think it's going to become a lot easier to be successful in a way that you already have the foundation. You don't have to build the foundation that there was nothing there like 20, 25 years ago. So I think that's going to help a lot. But to your point, it's hot right now, but it took a while to get to that point.
Well, we could just spend the whole time talking about this topic. I'm really excited. On the note on time, I think we're going to shave off some of the time of this session because we started a little late, and we'll still have time for questions at the end, just to set expectations. Let's dig in a little bit to one of these topics, which is global, local, local, global. We're seeing, if you look at the money invested last year, so there's a lot of money coming in now from outside. So early on you had local funds, Redpoint's been along for the long haul, Astella, you guys have been in the market for a long time too. There was a point in time when a startup had to consider moving its headquarters to a place like Silicon Valley in order to attract its next check. Those times seem to be gone. Most of the deals now that happen for startups in Brazil are a healthy mix of local and global investors. So tons of global money coming in. There's also tons of global tech companies coming in. Every time I see these stats, they surprise me because it was only 5, 6, 7 years ago that in Silicon Valley, Brazil was this afterthought market. Actually, who remembers Orkut? Yeah. This was funny because, Google, the story goes that Google at that time was giving out the Gmail invitations. It was a very hot thing. Facebook started off closed as well. And they gave, the story goes they gave one to John Perry Barlow at the EFF. And John Perry Barlow knew Gilberto Gil and handed all his invites out to Brazilians. And that apparently is the myth of why Orca took fire in Brazil. However, Google didn't really care about having a bunch of Brazilian eyeballs because they couldn't really monetize them at that time. So there's this history we've inherited that values different populations and audiences differently based on what you can charge for 1,000 eyeballs worth. And I'd also just like to remind myself and remind the group that those days are long since gone too. We were just talking about the dominance of WhatsApp with Brazil as the second largest market globally. Uber still maintains that Sao Paulo, Mexico City, and Rio, I think it's Sao Paulo, Rio, and Mexico City are 3 of their top 5 markets globally by volume. We could go to Spotify, Airbnb, WeWork. You go down the line of consumer tech companies, and Brazil is front and center of either one of the largest markets or one of the fastest growing markets. So, and to your point, Edson, we also have Brazilian companies that are globalizing. eBanx is an interesting story of this too. So I'd love to hear any comments, further comments about this global, this is now a global local game. Brazilian startups are not just generating Brazilian technology. What's changed in that mix? What's the actual scenario?
I think you mentioned also a good point for Brazil itself. And talking about eBanks, Brazil was very concentrated, most of the talent in São Paulo in the past, and now it's growing so fast that you're seeing going all over the place. And like eBanks, a good example that is based in Curitiba and in a totally different hub in Brazil. So even inside Brazil, you see the change in the infrastructure and the foundation is going all over the place. And talking about eBanks itself, it was a company that was created like 7 years ago, with the idea of financial inclusion. When we talk about all those companies, Uber, Airbnb, Facebook, and goes on, they want to sell products in Brazil, but they didn't know much about the Brazilian market. They didn't know that the majority of the population is unbanked. It's based on cash. They don't have an international credit card. So you might have an amazing product that you want to sell in Brazil, but nobody's going to be able to purchase. And that's pretty much how eBanks came about, is like how we can offer those international products in Brazil for the population that doesn't have an international card, and they start providing local payment methods like with voucher, cash, local credit cards and debit cards, and like from there it just took to a different level, and like in providing different kind of service from logistics, marketing, and legal. But I think it's a very good example of a company. I think Brazil, the particularity, not just in Brazil, but especially in Brazil, there's a lot of pain points, but those pain points create opportunities. And with these opportunities, you can just decentralize in Brazil, but you can also apply in other markets. And I think people in Brazil got tired to wait for either the government or international companies to try to solve those pain points. So like, you know what, we are smart enough, and now we have the investment foundation. Let's focus ourselves to try to solve that pain point. That's how eBanks came about it.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty interesting thing. If you look backwards, Brazil, some point in times, we're generating like a very, how can I say, nouveau type of innovations and applications of technology because of the type of problems that we have in Brazil. For example, the banking system evolved in a faster way because of the high inflation rates. So sometimes it requires to have the right type of problem at hand to create this type of solution. So when we look to companies like Resultados Digitais, which is a SaaS member today, just raised the largest software investment in a company in Brazil, but they created a solution that was very good for emerging markets. So that type of solution won't come from a developed country. So that's their path for innovation.
I'm going to play the role of a Silicon Valley investor who's not very familiar with the market. I don't think that's possible, Manoel, because Brazil is catching up to the developing markets. So you have all these unbanked people, but we've had banked people for a long time. So you guys are really just catching up. So how could it possibly be that Brazil is developing technology that could lead in other global markets? Explain this to me.
That's really, I'll try. Maybe Eric should be here on this TV with us. The thing is, sometimes those markets, they're not developed in the right way. So it's not just throwing technology that's going to solve the problem. You have to understand the reality of the people on the trenches, because they don't have the education, they don't have the parts, they don't have the time to learn. And when you deploy solutions there, it's completely different than a market that's a little bit more developed. So for example, when we're looking to mobile, when Fabrício was doing mobile development in Brazil, the key question was, are we going to have signal inside of the place that people are going to use the infrastructure? So it's not the same type of thing. So think about these problems is different when you have the problems at hand.
I mean, as a person who's been working for the big international company for most of my career, focused on growing markets that are very, very different, I can say that local companies have a huge advantage. And they probably do not actually realize it. And because they do not understand how little sometimes Silicon Valley companies understand about specific markets, Brazil, for example. And it's just really hard to really understand this gap in knowledge when you're in Brazil and here. And but I just want to kind of send the message to all entrepreneurs out there that they should be very confident in their knowledge of the market is the biggest asset that they have, and that they want to utilize that and grow in it. Because it's a good example about connectivity. For example, Facebook had to set up a connectivity lab to actually teach their product managers about the fact that, hey guys, people do not use iPhones only. They use Android devices with super small screens. They cannot put more than 1 or 2 applications on those devices because these devices do not have enough memory, and they want to have that memory for their photos. Right? It is obvious to everybody, I think, who's ever been basically working with the consumers, users in Brazil, but it's totally not obvious for the companies here. So that's just a small example, and I think it's very important to focus on those kind of small moments, but that's very important to make sure that you can innovate based on that.
I want to add to that the power of distribution, right? I mean, products are important, but VC is all about building distribution channels, massive distribution channels, and invest in entrepreneurs that possess weapons of mass distribution. And I think that what we have now is a generation of founders that understand the playbook, right? So what Eric at Resultados Digitais did, Gympass, Hotmart. So we borrow from the US playbook of how to grow fast, the triple, double. So they have the knowledge, they have the network, they have the connections, and they have the money. So it's not more a question of developing the product, but how far we can distribute our products.
And in that case, sometimes emerging markets have a lot more in common, right, in terms of consumer trends and such. I also just want to call out, for people who don't know what eBanx is doing, so eBanx enables, if you're local in Brazil, enables you to use these international services. I guess Airbnb would be an example, right, of a client, regardless of your local payment method. So they're doing that for all Latin America, localizing the payments, as well as working with some of the big Chinese companies, helping them as well. So it's really cool seeing how this stuff starts to stitch across. There's also a point, Ekaterina, you mentioned this a few minutes ago, there's this point about sometimes the consumer trends in Brazil or emerging markets are actually way ahead of the curve. So to this day, my American friends who don't spend time abroad are not comfortable with voice messages on WhatsApp. They're like, oh, what do I do? You just press play and you listen to it. Or I was surprised as well when all of this delivery stuff started really picking up speed here. It's like, no way I can get something small from the convenience store delivered to me with the press of a button. And the time I spent in Brazil, you could get the drugstore to bring you your medicine, you could get the pet store to bring you your food. These are ingrained existing habits, so I like playing with this very oversimplified notion of who's ahead, who's behind, as if there's some kind of linear progression towards unicornhood that happens. Does anyone want to comment more on the talent piece? Because we've touched on this, but it's no small thing. So going back to this tension between things moving slowly, things moving quickly, VCs work in 10-year cycles usually, from starting the fund to ending it. Talent also takes time to deploy through. Redpoint has a partner, Romero, who was an entrepreneur who then graduated to that path. Any other comments on what you're seeing in terms of concretely what's the quality of talent and how has that piece really changed in the last 5 years or so?
The most important thing I have to say on that is jobs@rpv.com.br. So if you're looking to go into one of our portfolio companies, but the reality that's one of the biggest bottlenecks today, right? It's I just wrote a piece about the lack of engineers in Brazil. If you look from 2008 to 2018 to 22, Brazil is going to hire only in the IT sector more than 400,000 people, and we're not forming those people. So that's a major problem. On the other hand, you have China like graduating 5 million engineers per year. So that's going to be a big thing. What we see is the quality of the founders and the teams on our companies is always getting higher, but it's getting harder to get to those people. So we need to do something in terms of how we educate, how we attract more people to these, especially for STEM education. And that's also a social thing, because when you make a new coder, that changes the life of that person. You're in a country where we have today 12% of unemployment, but on the tech sector, we're having a hard time to hire 5 developers. So what can we do if we change anything on that direction?
Yeah, that's super important. So at the VentureCity, we're also very focused on actually helping grow product talent and growth talent, which is very, very important. And in Brazil, you definitely have like good founders, but if you think of like, you know, the next, so you have the founder, you have the founding team, but then you need to start hiring the product managers, you need to start hiring marketeers, you need to start hiring growth people, and engineers, obviously. But then that's where the bottleneck is, because basically you need to have more hands to do that. And that's where we try to come in and actually help teach them like very basic things around, okay, how do you do how do you create a product roadmap? And then how do you execute on that? And I think, but it's a chicken and egg dilemma, and the more investment there is in the market, then the more people are willing to actually try and change their careers and do new things. And I'm kind of very optimistic about that, because also I see that like people in Brazil are very like proactive in the sense that they want to learn, and that's the most important thing, because all the tech, of course engineering is like probably harder, it takes time to become a good engineer, but if you think about product talent and even like maybe design talent and marketing talent, I think those skills are like easier to build, and like the more investment there is in the market, and the more people will be moving to those professions as well.
What is striking to me is the amount of experience founders are bringing to the table. 7 years ago, if you would sell your company for $50, $100 million in Brazil, you would move to Miami or Portugal. Today, we have invested in a company founded by Daniel Jovinsky. He founded Web Motors, sold it. Founded Itaú, sold it. Founded Minha Vida, sold it. And he's founding another company again. Ale Haddad, right? I mean, he's here, starting all over again in the Valley, so that is striking. And I think that is the main reason behind, Fibonacci taking off in Brazil.
Just to close out this topic, we did an inaugural survey of startups with venture backing about 6 months ago, and the hardest to recruit were senior engineers, C-suite, and product design.
Product is the biggest gap, interestingly. People do not always realize that, but like one of the strengths of Silicon Valley is the product people, basically.
We also did a quick look at, just to try to measure the experience level of the CEOs who responded to the survey, and 66%, this is all Latin America now, said that they've founded more than one company, more than half. Half of them are 30 to 40, about average age. 60% advise other startups, and 40% are angel investors in other startups. So those are numbers we'd imagine would go up over time. We've got about 15 minutes left to chat, and I want to spend a good amount of that time talking about some specific companies. But before we do that, I want to go back to we can't talk about all of this tech in a vacuum. And to Margarizi's point in the opening, and something I've been speaking with the partners at Redpoint about for a while, regardless of what the headline is about Brazil in the media, tech has been growing at a disconnect. Whether it's political, economic, environmental, or a hellstorm of all three mixed together, whatever we're reading here, there's this underlying tech story that keeps growing, really doubling year over year at this point. So I'd like to hear from folks on the ground investing and operating in this ecosystem. Do you agree there is a disconnect, and do we have any sense of why there is that disconnect? Why is there this really healthy thing that even if consumers have less purchasing power, or no matter what the issue is, we've got a really strong and growing story? And I'd just love to see if we could unpack that or get any insights as to why that is the case, or maybe just accept that it is the case for now. Throw you a ringer.
Hey, Anderson, do you want to join us? I think it's a mix of things, Julie, because in one hand you have something that was built over the last decades, that Brazil was growing based on the back of the demographic boom, so there was no investment at all in terms of infrastructure and technology across all industries. And there was also a lot of concentration, a regulatory framework that was creating this type of a setup. So in the end, those the incumbents and those original players, they became kind of delayed in terms of technology. And the other hand, you had big massive change in behavior of the consumer, the new generations because of tech. And now what we're seeing is that the tech sector is in this huge blue ocean, that they are bringing new ways of thinking, powered by technology in a more open way, a more distributed way. So it's a mix of things. So you have the effects of these two forces together. So when we see, for example, even if you look to retail, that is probably the most advanced, let's say, internet play in Brazil, which is e-commerce, it's still very small penetration compared to the offline, and it's growing at a large rate, even during this worst crisis that we had. So I believe that's a background of what's happening.
I trace it back to 2000 when Veronica and Marília and Beto started Endeavor in Brazil. I think that the work has been going on for 20 years now. Of course, there's something that changed after 2012. When you look at the Endeavor portfolio, we see clearly a different pattern from companies that started after 2012 and before that. But the groundwork was laid before that. So it's traceable to this 20 years of entrepreneurship gospel being played by Endeavor in Brazil.
It's just this converging, basically, where you have a couple of trends that are converging, where you have more investment coming in, like better talent, and second, third generation of the companies created by the same people, which is like very positive. And I also think that the overall knowledge right now is getting globalized, so people have access to so much more, right? Like you can just read so much. You can. It's very, very international, and it's just access to information is there, and that's this intellectual capital doesn't have any boundaries, which I think is very important, and that's why we see this growth in tech. And that's not only for Brazil, where you have basically some macroeconomic issues, but you have tech doing pretty well. So
yeah, I think it goes back also to the pain point. There's still a lot of pain points to be solved. So I think the opportunity is over there. And I think one thing that is also happening is not just about the startups and the fintechs. They are really changing the game and invest in technology and changing the way that the customer see things. But they also putting pressure on the big companies to keep it up. And that's happening a lot. Like Nubank is changing the way that they do bank in Brazil, and like the big banks, if they don't keep it up, they're going to be out of business. When Alibaba, AliExpress, Alipay came to China, I've been working with China for a while as well. All the banks used to see Alipay as a competitor. And then after a while, they realized okay, I don't have to see you as a competitor, but maybe we can partner, and I'm going to take care of what I know to do best, maybe manage a portfolio and invest in technology. So I see that happening also in Brazil. The small companies are really changing the game, putting pressure on the big companies to adjust and to be more flexible and invest more in technology. And in some cases, they are partnering also to collect bigger results.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Alipay, because there's a huge and growing influx of Chinese capital into the tech ecosystem as well in Brazil. Other sectors as well, but The more that shrinks in this ecosystem, we imagine that may grow in other ecosystems. Very interesting stuff. So for the last piece of time, and then we'll open for questions in 5 minutes or so, let's get into some concrete examples. We could go in a couple directions. One would be examples of startups that are effecting real change while also growing in a startup-like trajectory. In the US, we tend to view these as completely separate boxes that do not overlap. You're either investing for good or you're investing for financial returns. In the Latin American context, at least if we follow the money, we'll see examples like Dr. Consulta. I'm forgetting the specific investors. You'll have a blue chip venture capital firm investing next to an impact firm. These things seem to be coexisting more in the Brazilian context. You can be growing well and doing good. I'll actually just throw out one stat that we, I'll look it up in the startup survey and come back with it. No, I think I know it offhand. We asked these same group of startups, are you for profit, for impact, or both? And we got a number back. And then we said, okay, and are you measuring impact? So regardless of how you identify, whether you're a Movili or somebody else, are you actually measuring some kind of impact? And I think about half of the startups that said they were for profit are also measuring some kind of impact, whether it's financial inclusion or access to jobs or those kinds of things. So I'd love to hear some concrete examples of startups that are affecting real change and how, and or examples of how much opportunity for growth there is ahead. We could go in any order or down the line.
Well, I can be a little selfish and talk about eBanx again,
yeah.
but
you're allowed to talk about eBanx.
Okay. Well, I talk a little bit about financial inclusion, but I think that's very important because before, and now there are some other companies doing similar things, but before eBanx offered the opportunity for the customers to pay with the local payment methods, they didn't have access to a lot of products, goods, and service that was available every place else, and especially in the US. So now the customer, they have the facility, the ability to purchase products in a better price or service, a better service than sometimes the local ones, because they have this financial inclusion. And I think that's changing the game and taking the other competitors to think about the same way. So how we can bring this population that is still unbanked. I think the number was like 45 million of the Brazilians is still unbanked, and that's pretty much putting together the state of California and Oregon. That's the unbanked population in Brazil, and it's not even considering the underbanked, and underbanked, I say that people that have some access to the bank, but they overpay fees or other stuff. So I think I talk about eBanx, but I talk about fintech in general. Financial inclusion is very important because like from there, you gotta give access to them, not just to purchase goods, but to start investing and like maybe creating new startups, new fintechs, and really incentivizing the market to take to a different level.
There's an interesting example that we follow from the beginning. We were some of the first investors there. I was an angel investor before, which is Creditas. It started at Banco Fácil. So the point with Creditas was when Sergio started, it was a kind of a different business. He wanted to solve the problem on finding the right type of financial product for the customers. But today what they do is they provide secured loans, which has way lower interest rates for people that are with their cars and their house already paid. So the thing in Brazil is not that people don't have access to credit, but they have access to bad credit. It's bad priced. They're not considering the collaterals. They are the interest rates are super high. So when you put this type of operation in the play, and that can only be done by a new player, because a current player is going to cannibalize their existing business, which is basically based on high interest rates. Then the magic starts to happen. So what we see today, there is a tremendous growth. When we started, they had like 12 people. They're going to end the year with 1,000 people. Majority of that is people related to the operations and tech. So that's a different game. And when we listen to the customers, that's basically making a big difference in their lives. They're having access to better credit. They can solve some of their financial struggles. And we see that as just as the tip of the iceberg. It's two products that can be develop in many other ways.
What's the like socioeconomic general profile of a credit tax user?
It's interesting. It's definitely not the A and B class. It's people that has at least a small house that's already paid, or has a car that is already paid. It can be somehow old cars, but you have to have the good. But now what they're thinking is how can they go to the bottom of the pyramid? But you need to have at least some collateral. That's a part of what they do. One thing interesting with credit is that they're too worried with a lot of things related to impact, not just outside of the operation, but inside. The amount of women work on the tech and the product side is huge. They're promoting that all the time, so we believe that's a part of the dirty as well.
So, I want to just touch on two companies, and one is also continuing on the topic of financial inclusion. Is the company that we've invested. It's called Recarga Pay, and they're building a mobile wallet. But the way how they approach that is very relevant for Brazil, because they basically allowing people to top up easily, to top up their mobile accounts. And they were solving for that pain first and foremost, but that was the way for them to start introducing money into the system. And then they start building additional services on top, and also thinking of about microloans and all the other, building the ecosystem around that, once the people are happy with actually putting money into the system, because that's also the first big step, right? And then, getting back to what you've just said around investments also coming from traditional vehicles and more impact investing, they've been invested, for example, by IFC, which is part of the World Bank, right? So, and that's but also there's a VC investment in the same round, featured investment, traditional VC investors and IFC, which make a lot of sense for that type of product. And the second company is called Levi, and what they're doing, they're actually building kind of a marketplace for the big companies that are looking for the blue-collar workers. Because you know that there is that's a big part of the Brazilian economy still, and they are helping those companies manage their workforce, and on the other side, they're helping people who are in the market for those jobs to actually find those jobs easier, and then they're actually trying to build retention vehicle, because a lot of the people, a lot of blue-collar workers, they're actually changing a lot of work, changing a lot of jobs, and that's why they're trying to actually helping them stick with one job, which is good both for them, but also for the employers as well. So which I think is a great thing going forward for more stable jobs in the market, less commute times, which are very important in Brazil, because, for example, what Levi does, they're also looking at the location of the candidates, and they try to match their location to the location of their jobs. Because on average, the commute time in São Paulo, as everybody has been in that amazing city, is crazy, right? So.
I'd like to highlight how software is disrupting economic development. So economic development is all about productivity, right? And what software is doing is basically allowing companies of any size sell more, right? That's what Resultado Digital does, allow people to sell more or reduce costs, which is what OMI, another company we invested, does, which is disrupting the tax system and allowing companies to operate without spending too much time on accountants and law, legal, and all of that. So those two are hardcore examples of reskilling, which is also another big part of economic development. So
great examples all around. With that, I think we will open to, does anyone have a question? Oh, there's one here. There's a mic there. There's a question there. There's a woman down here with a question. So maybe we'll do 3 quick questions. Could do 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
So technological unemployment is supposed to automate a lot of jobs. We're already with 12, 13 million unemployed people. This is going to scale in Brazil quicker than we think. What specifically is being done to target unemployment?
Well, I think that the future of work is happening. When people say that people are going to lose their job because of technology, we go back 100, 200 years ago, and we learned that that's been going on forever, and it's going to happen all the time. So we bet heavily on reskilling, right? And I think that's one of the key economic development goals that we should all pursue, which is basically teaching people how to do their craft online. So OMI is doing that for accountants, RD is doing that for marketers. The job of every startup is basically reskill its clients, its distributors, and make sure that people are online.
There was one here and one over here. Oh, thank you.
I'd like to follow up on that discussion about the talent gap in Brazil and see what you guys think the private sector has done about that, because it seems that waiting for the political policies, nothing's going to change soon.
Not much to be real. I mean, it's there are a few things happening now in terms of building new engineering schools and more coding schools, digital skills schools, but that's a recent trend, maybe the last 2-3 years. Government is doing something, but I believe they're still missing the point. Sometimes it's they're preparing people with the skills that are not going to work when they're ready. So that could be a problem. One thing that I'm particularly interested is how can we kind of upskill people that are still on the job, and then they have the possibility that within the job get a bunch of new skills to keep there in a more, how can I say, modern way, the digital capabilities and things like that. And we're starting to see some people doing that. So even within the government, but it's way slower than we need. Yeah.
And then final question right here. Thank you.
I actually want to say that I'm very honored that this person is here. Tom Forensky, the man who coined the phrase, every company is a media company. Tom Forensky.
Now there's a lot of pressure for your question.
My study is called Silicon Valley Watchers. So what is the role of Silicon Valley today and tomorrow for Brazil's future? And how can that change, or has it changed in the past?
That's a great question, because I'm speaking with more and more entrepreneurs who are now looking to China for that inspiration. But I'd love to hear from you guys.
So the question is like
What's the
how
role
to...
Yeah, I mean, this is bridging Silicon Valley and Brazil. So what is the importance of Silicon Valley in this whole story?
I think it's just like Silicon Valley is the major source of major source of new frameworks, ideas, and innovation. But as I mentioned before, I think this knowledge is getting globalized. So I think it's just putting out more there and be, as always, generous with the new ideas and talking about those ideas. I think it's important. But then the other thing that I found always helps is just people need to travel more. It's as simple as that. They just need to go out to São Paulo or Rio and or go out to the other countries in the other cities in the country and spend time and find people to talk to and see how they use. What do they use and why do they use and what do they need in their lives, and that's the only way to build that connection, I find.
That's a good one. I mean, we try to position ourselves as a bridge between Brazil and Silicon Valley. We have two local funds here in the US that are partners of our firm, Redpoint and eVentures. One of the things that we like a lot is how can we use the accumulated knowledge and intellectual property of Silicon Valley to use that to resonate with our ideas? How can we use that to make our decision-making process stronger? How can we use that to accelerate the discoveries of our entrepreneurs? So I believe that's a very important thing. And the other thing that we cannot dismiss is that people here has still the mindset is more developing than buying risk and seeing what's beyond what you're seeing when you first met entrepreneurs. So Jeff Brody from Redpoint has a very interesting saying. He say venture capital and the way Silicon Valley does that is not about what can go wrong, it's what about can go right, which is very different than the traditional way of investing. I believe we still need that big time.
There's one last burning question.
No, it's not a question. I just want to comment on the 2 points. On the issue of jobs, this is a global issue, right? As one of you said, only China and India is producing enough engineers. However, I think Brazil is behind most countries in the world in realizing that you're not going to solve this problem alone, right? You need to go after the talent, whatever it is. And I see very few companies in Brazil starting to have engineering centers in other countries. And I think we really need to start more aggressively thinking about that. On the issue of Silicon Valley, I think there is a major change happening in the world. If you look 10 years ago, Silicon Valley was the only center of innovation, the only center of inspiration. And this is clearly not the case anymore. And in the next few years, a lot more is going to happen. And I think Brazil is extremely well positioned and obviously continue to look and get inspiration in the US, but potentially be looking at other places as well to be able to find ways to differentiate.
Thank you so much. Thank you, panelists. It's such an honor to be here and open up the day. We're looking forward to a wonderful day of great conversations.